Welcome to Leaders and Loggers, the podcast that quenches your thirst for leadership knowledge one pint at a time. Grab your favorite brew, sit back, and join us as we raise a glass to the world of leadership. I'm your host, Kevin Dawson, and each week we'll bring you refreshing conversations with leadership experts from around the globe. We'll dive into the minds of CEOs, thought leaders, and change makers, sipping on the secrets of their success. From the boardroom to the brewery, our guests share their unique perspectives on what it takes to lead in today's ever-changing world. Well, welcome to Leaders and Loggers. I'm your host, Kevin Dawson, and today I am joined by my friend Reid Rasmussen, who is the co-founder and CEO of a company called Freshbenies, but on top of that, he is an entrepreneur, a award-winning speaker, and a great podcast host, and I can't wait to share that story later. And while he may not have been born in Texas, he got here as fast as he could. And so, Reid, welcome to Leaders and Loggers.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. And what a great thing to be doing on a Friday afternoon.
Absolutely. I love it. And as I was telling you before we got going, the beer today pays a little bit of homage to your past. I brought a beer from Canada.
I love it. I love it. You got a there? What do you got? Yeah,
it's Kingsville it's the Kingsville Czech style lager out of Kingsville, Ontario.
There you go.
And so I saw this the other day and I'm like, oh, Reid's from Canada. I've got to have this for when Reid jumps on the podcast.
This is such an international conversation. I love it. And yeah, I'm originally from Canada, which from Texas, that's 2 countries over. Because there's Texas, there's all the rest of America, and then there's Canada. So,
you know, which is funny. I flew in late last night from Detroit, which is the closest I've gotten to Canada ever.
And dude, you're right on the edge.
I was right. I could see taking off. I'm like, hey, that's Canada over there. So, Reid, cheers. I know you are more of a wine drinker. So, cheers to our conversation.
Thank you. And I went international with my choice as well. I've got here a Napa Valley wine that is just fantastic. It's a Cabernet. And I had in there my Paris wine stopper because we just got back from a trip to Paris. So I worked on my French, again, tied back to Canada, because there you had to take a couple of years of high school French or something else, but most of us took French. So I realized how little of my French I remember from high school. But there we are. Cheers to you. Cheers.
It was funny. So I took 4 years of German in high school, and I don't remember a lick of it other than, you know, a little bit here and there. I was at an airport bar yesterday, and there were 2 gentlemen who were getting ready to fly to Frankfurt sitting next to me speaking in German, and I'm trying to listen into their conversation. I'm like, well, I know that word and that word, but I was completely lost.
Exactly. You mentioned Detroit. So here I was. This is about 10 years ago. I had a trip to Europe planned with a big group of friends and family. There was 18 of us that were going. We'd planned this trip long in advance. We were all written this big place there as a group. And a week before I go, I realized my Canadian passport is it's out of date. Like, I'm not going to be able to go on this trip. And at that time, I had to get to a Canadian consulate, and the Canadian consulate in Dallas wouldn't issue a passport that fast. So the next morning I flew to Detroit, because you mentioned Detroit. I crossed under the river and went over to the Canadian consulate in Windsor, Ontario, sat there, and I had to wait 2 days in town there to get my Canadian passport issued on an emergency run. So that a few days later I could go on this trip that I'd planned for a full year. So, yeah, Detroit is is just across the river from Canada. So there you are.
And it's the only place in America you have to go south to get to Canada.
Yeah, a lot of people don't think about this, that we think that like BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, that goes along Washington, Montana, etc., is all just the 49th parallel, and it just goes across to the east, and it doesn't. It dips down a lot. So here's the one that'll win you a beer in a bar. Would you believe that the southern tip of Canada is south of the northern border of California? And Windsor, Ontario is it's hard to believe that from there and below, where Toronto and whatnot are, is about the same level as the northern part of California.
I would never, I don't ever look at a map to go, oh, let's do that. But I like geographical trivia. I love any type of trivia period, but that's a good one. I like that one.
Okay, so we already helped somebody get a beer on Leaders and Loggers. So
there we go. There we go. Well, Reid, you've done so much over the course of your career. I would love for our audience just to hear a little bit of your story, because it's very unique and you've done a lot. And I think it's really exciting how you've parlayed you coming from Canada to the US and focusing a lot of your career on healthcare, which obviously there is some differences between Canadian and American healthcare systems, but not to make that the heart of the conversation, but really developing your leadership skills around that.
Yeah, there really is a thread and a through line that I was able to leverage, something that made me an outsider into a part of my personal brand along the way. Yeah, in Canada, my degree was in health administration, which meant you were going to work for the government or you were going to work for a hospital. And I worked for each for about a year. And in 91, I decided I would chase opportunity and a girl. The girl didn't work out, but the opportunity did.
Never does. Never does.
So I chased that to Seattle. I came to America. And on this side, I ended up on the health insurance side. I worked for Kaiser, which is a big HMO in Washington State. Then I worked for the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan there for a long while, sort of learned the healthcare industry. It's funny, those of us that work in the healthcare or the benefits industry, none of us understand it until we get inside, and then we're in there for 20 years and we still don't understand it, right? But I sort of learned the American system. Along the way, I got asked at times and poked a bit about, can you describe the Canadian healthcare system and what lessons are there? Or, if America is going to move towards a Canadian style system, should we, shouldn't we? What lessons are there? And I started to learn to be able to speak about that in a way that would make sense to Americans. Because to a fish, everything they know is water. So to try to describe life outside of water, or that you could even exist outside of water, that's what it felt like when I was trying to describe another country's healthcare system to Americans. So I learned to speak on that and got pretty good at being able to describe that. Probably a couple hundred speaking opportunities after that I had the chance to speak to industry groups, business owners, a lot of people inside the health insurance industry. And it really did sort of leapfrog my exposure of being an expert, which was pretty interesting because it was basically the same kind of presentation, but it was about a topic that happened to carry some legs. Years later, when I decided to start my own company, all of that leadership and exposure that I'd built off of that topic really led and helped me have a bigger platform and a bigger audience once I started my company. It made it obvious that I knew a lot of people around the country and I had deeper roots and sort of a proven expertise that I was able to leverage. The whole thing's interesting. And then it goes back to my expertise was on a healthcare system that isn't at all the American healthcare system,
Yeah. What's interesting to me about all of that is for a lot of leaders, we kind of fall into our industries. If we all got to grow up doing what we said we wanted to grow up to be when we were in kindergarten, life would maybe be really cool. But, because I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to come into the insurance world and work in healthcare, because what kindergartner wants to do that?
You don't even understand what it means, right?
I can't even spell insurance. I still can't spell insurance. But we get this outsider perspective sometimes as we fall into becoming insiders, and that outsider perspective helps us become those thought leaders. And I know you've been speaking for a number of times. You are a thought leader within the healthcare and insurance and benefits space.
Yeah.
So my question really is around in terms of developing leadership presence. What are some lessons that you've learned where from sharing the stage to creating content and videos and just trying to say, hey, I want to help develop people by through thought leadership. What are some things that you learned in that process?
Absolutely. One of the very first things I learned was I remember being 19 years old, and a business person that I was working for at that time said, I don't care what industry you're in. At the time, my degree was computer science. I was going to be a computer nerd. Didn't stay there, but he said, I don't care what industry you're going into. Your ability to present to people will serve you better in any industry you're in. So just do it a lot and struggle through the challenges of it, because the better you're at presenting ideas and being able to speak to groups of people, the better off your career opportunities are going to be. So I was a nerd. I was so self-conscious. I was terribly nervous speaking in front of people. So I just got out and, anybody who's been through Toastmasters knows their philosophy is completely correct, which is we just got to get you up and speaking and practicing presenting in front of people. So number one is go out and do it. And I don't care if you're nervous about it. Don't call it nerves. Call it adrenaline, because it's really what's happening in your body. Your body's getting this loaded with this adrenaline. The part that I'd love to this day is I still get adrenaline going into a presentation. I don't consider it nerves. I consider it, I'm just anxious that I want to make sure I'm giving the best I possibly can. And the day I don't even think that I worry about that, if there's not even a little bit of a shot of adrenaline in me, then it just means I don't care about my audience. So one, just learn to live off that adrenaline, because the second you step off that stage, your body's filled with this adrenaline. And that's why speaking in front of people can be such a high, because you're getting this energy. It's the very thing that in the beginning makes you think you shouldn't want to do it. So one, do it. And then two, prepare, because so many people don't like to present because they actually didn't prepare. And here's 3 questions that I think you should prepare on before every presentation. One, who's your audience? Think about who your audience is. One of the very first questions I asked you, Kevin, was who's your audience on Leaders and Loggers? Yep. And the fact that you said to me, Reid, it's not people in our industry. It's a whole bunch of, it includes entrepreneurs, and it includes people who are working inside other organizations who want to be better leaders. It's people who are up and comers, and they're looking for those leadership lessons. And to me, that says, I'm going to tell these stories, and I'm going to stay away from the jargon and these stories. So like just a thought of who are you actually talking to? So often we don't even think about that, and we end up giving sort of, we missed the mark because we didn't really think through who was in the room. So one is, who's your audience? 2, how do you want this picture to end? So if you're going to, if I have 20 or 30 minutes with you, and when this movie is ended, is there one thing that I would like people to leave with? And maybe it's an inspiration, maybe it's an idea on leadership, maybe it's a sales presentation and I want them to sign the dotted line. Maybe I don't think they'll get so far as to sign the dotted line, but if I can get them thinking this is a positive idea, then that's good enough. And think through how far can I bring these people along and where I want that to end, because that will help you determine what are the things you're going to say during your presentation. And it helps you edit out the stuff that you shouldn't say if you keep that in mind. And then the third thing is, what are the tough questions going to be? A lot of times our nervousness comes over the fact like, oh, people could shoot me down. You didn't exactly just put to paper, what are the 5 tough questions? Because once you think about them, figure out how you're going to address them, then you're kind of waiting for them to happen. And not only are you kind of waiting for them to happen at the end, but they become things that you can address along the way. So you pre-address them. Now, if you're in sales, all of this is making complete sense, but is a good reminder for you. If you don't consider yourself in sales, those 3 things will dramatically help. They were killer for me 20 years ago, and to this day, I still repeat them to.
It's great information, and in that first point, like knowing your audience is such an important deal. I spent this entire time in Detroit really honing in on that skill of being able to speak to them versus me, and I think sometimes we lose focus because we get excited and we want to talk about the cool thing that we're doing and how a solution we've come up with is going to help people. But unless we're understanding the people on the other side of the stage or the table and what their needs are and what they're going through, all the cool things that I can talk about mean nothing. And so I love that component of know your audience and getting past those nerves. I still get the that adrenaline rush right before hitting the stage. And I think, I've got friends who've been professional athletes. They talk about it before hitting the field. It's just that excitement and that energy that comes with, I get to go do something that I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, you've been this thought leader, and it seems like there's a huge shift in modern leadership now around content creation. I'll quote Gary Vaynerchuk for a little bit, like he's always creating content, and I love it. And from a sales perspective, sales is like always be closing, but it feels like now it's always be creating.
That's better. I appreciate that you modified it.
Yeah, always be creating. And so you've got, while we haven't been focused on industry, but you've got this really great podcast series, Brokers and Cars Getting Coffee. I would love for you to share a little bit about it, but just talk through the importance of creation of thought leadership.
Yeah. When we built our company, Freshbenies, we built it completely from the ground up. And as I hinted at, I went out on the education circuit and started to talk about healthcare innovations, the kinds of things we were doing with our company that were the solution. So I made classes around that. And a few years in, we did an analysis, and about 80% of all of our sales had come from relationships that started out of me teaching a class somewhere. So my wife, who's my business partner and co-founder, she said, okay, here's the one job you have. Go out and be a thought leader, be a teacher. And then LinkedIn was starting to really get a lot of content. So we started to push that out there, build newsletters, et cetera. So it was more of like we had our running papers, and this was about 8 years ago. So we really started to do a lot, and we blogged, et cetera. And after a while, we're looking for different ways of maximizing the way that you could engage on social. And just about 4 years ago, my marketing director said, LinkedIn is giving a lot more credibility towards video content than the blog articles that we were writing. And so if you put a video up, you'd get like 2, 3, 4 times the exposure than if you just posted a blog. So we're like, okay, well, we need to do some videos. And my first thought was, I just finished watching Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars
Getting Coffee. Yeah.
And here I was engaged in 5 seasons of Jerry talk to comedians. Now, I'm not a comedian. That's not my craft, but I loved listening to people talk about their craft. And that's what your conversation here is all about, which is like, as great as you are, Kevin, 500 episodes in, nobody's going to listen to you the same time over, right?
Right.
And yet, talking with multiple people about their craft of leadership is why Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars was fun. It was kind of a fun format, and it was a bit of a consistency through it. And my initial thought was, oh, well, I'll just get on, and I'm gonna have somebody interview me on selling inside the insurance industry. And my VP of sales at the time, he goes, when I shared the idea with him, he's like, Reid, I don't think anybody's gonna listen past 3 episodes of you talking about how to sell. And I'm like, oh, like I forgot my audience, right? I'm like, oh, facepalm. And I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go find people inside our industry and do exactly what you've done here. I happen to put it in this format of being in a car, having a cup of coffee. It gives you a little bit of something to talk about, just like you got your loggers, right? And that theme and that through line helps to build a brand that people will grab onto a little bit more. But the real key out of this for anybody else that's looking at creating content is, this is the lesson. You become an expert if what you are is you're the person curating, bringing in great people who have stuff to say. So Kevin, you've built an expertise because you invite in people who aren't boring and dull and have nothing to say, rather than have something to say, and you help pull out the great lessons and feed it up well to your audience. And so it's a little bit of, you get to pull yourself up by the bootstraps if you're smart enough to find a group of people to interview who are what your audience wants to listen to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that a little piece. But I've loved watching your series. The last one, well, I guess it was the last one I watched, where you had 5 people in the car.
Yeah. We loaded up an SUV and there was 6 of us in there.
Oh my goodness, that was crazy to watch, but it was so much fun.
It was good. It was so much good advice. And they all happen to be marketing experts. So we were getting all this great conversation around how do you get more engagement on social media today? And how do you build an audience? And what is marketing like? And we were talking about the very thing that you just said, which is how much work it is to continue to build content, but how vital it is. And what you did 3 years ago isn't going to work the same way today. So are you staying up to watch to see where things are adjusting to?
Which I know all of the guys you had in that video, and all of them, while they're experts in the field, they all have great personal brands. And I think as leaders, like that comes with being a thought leader, being creative, like lean into your personal brand, because people remember that, not necessarily where you are.
Right. It goes back to the whole thing of people don't remember what you said, but they do remember how you made them feel. And how are you connecting emotionally with people when you're talking with them? Are you bringing in stories, etc.? So one of the comments that was brought out in that video, and it fits with this exact thing, which is what's more important today from the past? Hey, when I first started my career, I spent my 20s never telling anything personal about myself, having a closeted personal house and my family, and I had my work life. And when I came to work, I put on a suit and a certain face, and I never talked about anything challenging going on in my life or anything real personal. It was always me trying to I was trying to be somebody I wasn't, right? And I think it added an awkwardness to me. And in today's world, we spoke about it in that on that episode of Brokers and Cars, which was in today's world, it's more important that you let a little bit of your personality shine, because our relationships, there's a lot more of them today, and they're faster and they're quicker. So people aren't listening to get to know you in a 20-minute conversation. Mostly on social media, you don't get 20 words. So like, does a picture tell 1,000 words? Do you tie in some personal things you're going through? Like, oh, I'm on a trip. Last week I was on a trip to Seattle and I took a picture from there and I referenced something. It was interesting, the few dozen conversations that came out of that, how that related to other people, et cetera. And that's, in today's world, it's more important to let a little bit of your personality out and to be more transparent. It opens up a level of trust, considering people, especially on social, it's much shorter, quicker conversations.
I love that, because I was just sharing this on a podcast that I was a guest on, talking about the importance of just being authentic. You and I could spout off 20 different statistics about things and be very technical, but people aren't going to remember those as much as they're going to remember us being authentic or being vulnerable, being ourselves, and sharing a little bit of emotion with a story.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that leaders need to really lean into way more than.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
This morning I was, there's a set of classes you can sign up for called Masterclass that are subscription masterclass. Right. So this morning I was listening to Joy, I forget her last name, Mangello, I think it was. She's the woman who made the mop that you twist itself and you twist the handle, and she sold it on QVC and made millions. And they made a movie called Joy about her. And she was talking about How do you tell a story that connects with people? Because her entire story, if you've ever seen that movie, if you haven't, it's worth it, or listen to the masterclass. Her ability to talk through, how do you tap the right kinds of challenges and emotions with a story? And why is that so much more important than just pitching a product? I mean, it's billions of dollars worth of difference. And the lesson's there for us to learn, and most of us forget it and go into sell mode at times, right?
Right. So, Reid, I know you've been a lifelong learner. I can see behind you stacks and stacks of books. And I know you and I are both very much in the mindset that leaders are learners. And as you've built your business, and along the way you've learned things on your own. You didn't let somebody say, well, I'm going to teach you these things. Like you said, I'm going to go do this, which I think is important for anybody. Like, hey, go take a moment to go learn something. Well, it doesn't matter what it is, just go learn something. And for leaders who are working towards, hey, I want to advance my career, I want to advance my title and do these things. What are your thoughts around leadership development on a personal level?
You're right. It was a lesson I got about that time from the same business owner that I met when I was 19. And he said, the lessons are here in books and most people don't read them. After college, most people stop, they say, I'm not going to read another book. But I bought into it at that idea. And every month since then, I have read at least one book that's on business or personal development or, business or personal development every single month since I was 19 years old. So you add that up over the years, and it's a lot of different great lessons. And along the way, some are written well, and some are a repetition of other stuff, and they aren't that well. But it doesn't mean you should stop taking in that information. So if a person wanted some great leadership right now, I would just start with the top list of New York Times bestsellers. That's generally a good place to go. I might listen to some Adam Grant on his book, like Think Again. I would absolutely go pick up 5 books by John Maxwell on whatever leadership. He just put out a brand new book on communication with people and how that connects. I would go either listen or read 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership of his, which has been such a handbook for folks. I would listen to the Andy Stanley podcast, which is a great collection of great leadership teachers and good podcasts. And I just keep learning and learning and learning. And it's not your boss's job. It's not, if they're not buying the book for it. I've never had a boss buy a book for me. It's been me on self-education, investing in my own education over the years.
So how do you take that mindset and employ that within the culture of your organization?
Oh, well, in my organization, yeah. So I started our company 14 years ago. For the first 3 years, it was just me beating my head against the wall, trying to just prove that I had a business idea worthy. About 2.5 years in, my wife joined me. It was the two of us beating our head against the wall. And then that next year, it finally started to take off and explode. And it was after that we started to hire our first few people. Right from the beginning, we grew as a remote company because it was just about the right time when cloud computing and good secure systems allowed it to happen, and Zoom and WebEx were out there that you could do remote meetings. And I found that was the point where people were comfortable starting to have that kind of a distance remote sales interaction. So we built a remote company, but I needed people to be leaders and to be independent, because I was never building an organization where they were just sitting across the aisle from me that I could watch and see if they were making their calls. I needed everybody to pull their own weight and be independent and think independently. And that's very much the need inside every small company. And as they grow and become entrepreneurial, is you want as many leaders in there as possible. So we have a book of the quarter. We're always reading something as a team, because you get a little bit of value when you get some of that same playbook of language, and people are learning some of the same lessons as a team. And then separately are always recommending various great books that we've had over the years. But the book of the quarter is probably one of the biggest ways that we're developing that. We also have our COO. She started a series here this summer where every couple of weeks she preps a leadership lesson. We did one yesterday that was, and we make that one voluntary. So people don't have to attend, but most all of our team will show up every time because they really like it. If you're going to be there, you're going to be called on. Everybody's given input. And yesterday our topic was on integrity and how does that play out in our work life? And what are some of the challenges in our lives when we haven't had integrity? And so it's just ingrained in us that it's continual learning.
I love that you have this book of the Quarter Club. You've got these leadership calls, and you, as you mentioned, you kind of at the forefront of remote work, where we are in that weird kind of place right now, I think, as a society of like, do we stay remote? Do we bring people back in? Like there's this fight, of, no, we want to bring people back into the office because we've got all this real estate we were paying for. But then you have a culture of like, no, we want to stay remote. How do you for people who are kind of like, how do we build a company that's in a remote environment or a hybrid environment for some? How do you build that? But not just build the company. How do you build the culture? Because I think that's the most important thing.
It is the most important thing. We were quite arrogant about it on March 17th, 2020, when all of a sudden the entire country said, we need to be remote. We're like, been there, done that. We don't need to do anything. And then I realized in our company, we serve employers. So we have about 3,000 different employers that we serve around the country. So we got to see the other side of how those employers were struggling with that. And one of the things I saw was we were at an advantage because from the very beginning, we were hiring and developing people and setting up systems with the intent of being remote. So somebody would kind of flame out early in working with us if working remotely wasn't working for them. Whereas in March of 2020, all these companies had to go remote, but like their communication style, their management, the way people worked with your manager, your mentor, your leader, the HR in the company, all of that was built on being close to each other. And so you're right. Some of them are still struggling because some of those same people are still struggling with the fact that they really should be working in an office together. But I think hybrid's probably very realistic for a ton of companies from here on out. And the more companies will set up a culture of leadership, don't micromanage, trust your people. Are you leading based upon outcomes and not micromanaging? You're going to have a better culture. And people are going to be more engaged as employees if you give them, give them the rope to go and make some mistakes. And I guess that's a good one as well. Is it okay to make mistakes in your culture?
Yeah,
or
that's a
stop everybody from failing.
That's a hard one, I think, for a lot of leaders, is like letting your people fail. I think as a parent, when my son was young,
oh my gosh, there's the example.
Yeah, it's like you kind of have to let them fail a little bit, because if you're doing everything for them, they don't grow. And I remember I was working for an insurance carrier at the time, and they brought me in to develop their sales teams. And I would have people come in who were out of industry, but wanted to learn how to sell and do things. And they would come to me with like ridiculous ideas. And I knew they were ridiculous, but I couldn't tell them they were ridiculous because I needed them to learn that on their own, and said, okay, hey, you know what? That is an idea. Why don't you go try it out? And I'm like, go do it fast, because I want you to fail fast so we can move forward if it doesn't work. Now, if it does work for some reason, great. But that's a hard thing to do as a leader, is to let people kind of do that.
Yeah. But if you're going to let people be leaders, you have to give them that room. I'm not saying I got to figure it out, right? I struggle, my team will tell you, yeah, he fails on this, every week. But that's the culture where it's like, okay, you called me on it. Yeah, I'll admit I failed on that. That wasn't, I'll do better next time, continuous learning, man.
It is. Now, this is something that I have a question for you. So you've built this culture. I want to know what it's like to build a business with your spouse, because that to me seems like a challenge in its own right.
We get asked this question a ton. And, it's funny, whenever we meet other entrepreneurs and they are a couple, and we certainly have our little cadre of friends who we know that are like that, you can just look at them and just have the nod and go, yeah, I know what you're going through, man. That relatability. We often get asked about it. I'll start with my wife, Heidi's. People would say to her, this is pre having the business together. People would say, oh, what's your advice on having a great marriage? And she would say, choose wisely. And if it's before you've been married, then that's good advice. If you've already just gotten married to somebody and her advice is choose wisely, and they go, yeah, but what if you didn't? That's the reason that's the advice is choose wisely, because you are in for the long haul with that person, right? When she and I chose to join in business, it was in employee benefits, which was my world. Her world was retail marketing, which had nothing to do with my world. So she was coming to my world, and she was a bit kicking sand when we were first talking about her coming over and going, well, what could I do of value for you? And I'm like, oh, let me tell you, the employee benefits world is so horrible at marketing and communicating to employees and employers on how to use insurance and the benefits industry. And it's such a challenge. And that's what we need to solve. I said, so therefore, before you learn too much jargon and too much about the industry, I need you to bring some of your great marketing skills to simplify the way we speak to our clients. And so she had a very clear expertise and a clear set of marching orders for herself of that was going to be her area. And after about the first year of her learning how we work together, then she and I very quickly started to say, okay, these are your areas and these are my areas. We lead together, and to this day, we're co-CEOs. So we talk through a lot of things with our leadership team. But if it's a tie on a decision, but it's in her areas, which are operations, marketing, our member experience, she gets the final say. If it's in my area of expertise, which is employee benefits or sales or the healthcare industry, I get the final say. And that's probably been the greatest piece of advice, because when I see couples who can't work together, it's that each other's getting each other's business and they're telling them, because a spouse will poke at each other's business too much if you're not careful. So learn to play fair.
That's great advice, not just in the realm of, hey, I'm working with my spouse, but working and collaborating with other people on my team.
Oh, big time.
Because I think sometimes we selfishly want to be the person who comes up with the idea or has the final say and can get in our own way, instead of trusting the people that we've partnered with to collaborate and say, hey, well, this is your area of expertise, so the tie goes to you, or the tie comes to me for this, or somebody else, on a team, and trusting, and everybody, to your point, to have that level playing field with everybody, but trusting where the expertise lies.
And it doesn't mean that along the way you don't have some very robust conversations, right? If you're looking for some advice on that, go read something by Brené Brown, or go read Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And you'll see the discussion of this culture that it's comfortable to talk about the tough situations openly without feelings getting hurt, because you've built this standard of being open about this stuff. And then you go and you leave and you learn how to work as a team then afterwards. So.
No, I love that. So one final question before we wrap things up for you. Where do you see leadership evolving in the age with all the technology that we have? We've got artificial intelligence coming into play for a lot of organizations. How does that affect leadership?
I've been very curious about AI this year. We first brought some AI into our company about 5 years ago, and I thought it was at a point then when it was going to answer a lot more challenges than it was. But we got to learn a lot about it. I've been very curious about it this year and talked with a lot of other entrepreneurs about how are they getting it to work in their company. The biggest thing I would say is it's developing, but there is still such a need for leadership to direct where it is going to be working. And I would say if I was somebody who was very young in my career and was looking at it being a significant portion of the next few decades of my work, I would really emphasize what are the things where great leadership will direct the AI in the right areas, and yet the wisdom of getting having better being really good yourself at conversations, listening to others, diagnosing challenges. Yes, maybe technology will come in to solve it. And then how are you there watching to see what the next challenges will be? And that's probably going to be solved because you're going to still need to work with people to come up with what that next phase is of the technology. So I would say it goes back to close to that same advice that I got when I was 19, which is if you can communicate really, really well, I don't care your career, you're going to do better going forward than if you just rely on the technology and your own personal smarts.
Love it. Well, Reid, it is time for last call. And so for our listeners this week, what is something that they can do to be a better leader?
Okay, I just took my last sip of wine. Here's the advice I have at the end of this week after a busy week, and it ties to another leadership book. It was the best single most influential book I read in the entire last year. It was book of the quarter with my team, and it's a book called Smart Brevity. And here's my advice. People don't have time to read a long email. They don't want to listen to a long voicemail. They're busier and busier than ever before. We have to change the way that we communicate, especially in the way we write. You need to start with a headline, follow it up with a little bit of follow-up information, and make emails and other communications very simple to read. And in the same way, when you bring that to the speaking and teaching platform, lead with your most important point or question or request, and then follow up with more information and give somebody the point of where else to go to get more information. And it turns around the way that you write and think and communicate. But in today's world, I think there is nothing about the future that isn't going to help if you work on.
Love it. Love that. Reid, how can our listeners learn more about you, learn about Freshbenies? Where can they go find all of that information?
Well, when your name is Reid Rasmussen, there's not a whole lot of you on LinkedIn. There are some, but you can easily find me there. Freshbenies is fresh, B-E-N-I-E-S. So you can find me at freshbenies.com. You can communicate with me through there, through LinkedIn. That's mostly where I am. As far as Freshbenies, if you are an employer, whether you are a small employer or a mid-sized employer, and your people are having challenges interacting with the healthcare industry and with their insurance, and they're just more and more confused by it because the system has some confusing aspects to it, Freshbenies can help. We're an employee benefit that helps employees cut their healthcare costs and confusion. So that's a reason for you to tie in with us at Freshbenies. If that's not you, then that's not, but I'd love to have a connection on social media, and just let me know that you heard through Kevin's podcast here, and I'll connect with you, and we can watch each other grow and succeed on social, because Kevin and I have been tracking each other there. That's really where we developed our following for each other.
Reid, I thank you so much for joining me for a little bit of a Friday afternoon happy hour and talk about leadership, which both of us love to talk about. And so again, thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate you, buddy. Keep up the great work.
Thanks. Well, thank you for listening to the Leaders and Loggers podcast. Hey, if you loved listening to our conversation today, please share this with a leader who needs to hear from our conversation. If you have not subscribed, we'd love for you to subscribe. We're on all of the streaming platforms and on YouTube. And I hope you'll join us next week for another pint and conversation. We'll see you then.
Take care.